Hello and welcome to this VisibleThread webinar. My name is Micheál McGrath. I'm the VP of Marketing here at VisibleThread, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome all of you here today. So thank you for taking your time out of today, wherever you're coming from, wherever you're tuning in from. We're really delighted to have you. We have a wonderful discussion on the good and bad use cases of AI in GovCon. We have two excellent speakers here for you today. So before we get started, I have a little bit of housekeeping to do at the very beginning, just to help us out and keep this webinar working kind of coherently. The first thing is, like all VisibleThread webinars, we want to have you involved. So this is an open discussion. We want to have your feedback, your questions coming into the audience. So there's coming into the speakers. So there's two ways of doing it. We have an attendee chat on the screen, so you can see that there. Feel free to let us know where you're tuning in from. I'm here in Cork, in lovely Ireland. So we'd love to see how many people get you all working together. We have a great group of people joining this webinar today. So feel free to get involved and network in the attendee chat. But at all times, we have a Q&A box also on screen. So the Q&A box goes straight to the speakers. The speakers will be answering questions throughout the session, but we will allocate time at the very end to answer all your questions. So feel free to throw in questions whenever you may want. We want as many questions as possible, so please keep them coming. Secondly, on the resources side, underneath the stream, you'll see lots of really helpful resources. All our resources are free, open source. Feel free to download and get involved. We have lots of events coming up in the near future that we'll go through at the end, but there's a lot of AI-related resources that connect directly with this talk, so you might find those valuable to share within your organization as well, so feel free. And I'll also point out Fergal's newsletter. Fergal, our CEO and our speaker today, does a really helpful newsletter that gets promoted every 2 weeks. So there's a new newsletter. It's live as of 20 minutes ago, so that's available there. So subscribe and check out that newsletter. It aligns perfectly to this topic. And last but not least, the number one question: will this webinar be recorded? When will I get the slides? Yes, it will be recorded, and the slides will be available tomorrow. So everything will be available at VisibleThread.com. You'll be able to download, share with your colleagues, etc. So we look forward, you'll receive the recording and slides via email tomorrow. So thank you very much. Without further ado, I'll pass you on to our speakers. Today we have Fergal McGovern, our CEO and founder of VisibleThread, and we have Chris Bassila, CEO of Hovister Advisory Group. Thank you so much for working with us today. Thank you, Chris, for joining us. First VisibleThread webinar. We're very happy to have you. So thank you very much. So I'm going to pass you over really quickly to Fergal. He's going to go through the agenda, and we're going to do a few introductions. And if you have any questions throughout, feel free to put into the Q&A box. So thank you very much.
Great. Thanks so much, Micheál, and welcome, everybody. I hope you get some value from today's session. And I'll second that comment. Thanks so much, Chris, for taking time out to join us. I know your depth and value is going to be excellent in this. You'll make up for my inadequacies, I hope. Great. So let me just go through some of the kind of, at least what Chris and I, when we were planning for this, we kind of put together what we thought was going to be interesting for the audience. I will underscore, whilst we are VisibleThread, we of course have a product. This is not a product pitch. A huge amount of my work, certainly since January of this year, and probably going back to last year, has been helping people understand really about generative AI, where it's useful, where it's less useful. So we'll do that as part 2 here, but we'll probably go into some background on Chris and myself as well to kind of give you a feeling for how we got into this space. Chris has got a phenomenal kind of, almost a kind of a business canvas for AI is the best way I can put it, which is point 3. So he's going to share that and walk through that as well. And you know, as we kind of meander along our travels today, we'll talk about kind of, you know, pitfalls around GenAI, you know, things like hallucinations, security implications, etc. So we hope we'll kind of get through something useful and interesting for you. We hope it's no nonsense. We hope it's practical and you'll have practical takeaways. And then at the end, of course, if there's any questions, it's always a good sign if there are some questions. So, you know, be generous, be sympathetic to us. We'll gladly handle those. Chris and I can talk quite some time, or at least certainly I can talk. So no questions, we'll certainly carry on and we'll hopefully add some value. Okay, Chris, why don't we start the ball rolling and kind of talk about kind of the personal journey. So I was hoping maybe, Chris, maybe you could help us understand. So I know you've been kind of around the proposal kind of world for some time. How did you get into this whole thing? What kind of rose your boat? What's your thing? You know, help us understand kind of your background and what you're involved in.
Thank you. Well, first, thanks for inviting me, Fergal, to this webinar. I'm really excited about this. So yeah, it's funny. I think like most people in proposals, you kind of fall into proposal almost by mistake. I'm an aerospace engineer by trade, but I think a couple of years into my journey, I realized I'm an average to below average engineer at best. So maybe I should get my my hand on something else. So back 20 years ago, I started doing bids and proposal on the commercial side in training and simulation. And that really opened up my eyes to kind of the friction with the market, talking to customers. Back then it was called a proposal engineer. In other words, a gopher that helps the sales folks, travel and talk to clients and present the technical stuff. And I really thought it was very enjoyable. But my journey is a bit like atypical in the sense that, I did after that, I worked in the CTO office, chief technology office. I worked in marketing, strategy, and then round up my career again in bids and proposal on the defense side of the house, and did a bit of strategy and competitive intelligence. So kind of a master, I know a few things, but I don't know a lot. So anyway, 3 years ago I started my consulting practice, focusing on bids and proposal. What we started helping clients with with their bids, response, so on and so forth. We did the bid transformation. And about a year ago, to get to the point about generative AI, I was pulled by one of my big clients to say, hey, you need to help us with this. And frankly, he wouldn't take a no for an answer. It was a big company. So I kind of found myself almost by default getting into this. And I realized quickly that I need to get educated and need to understand the market and what's going on. So did a big scan on market research in terms of who's out there, in terms of technology vendors, what they do, how they do it, and so on and so forth. Very long and laborious, but very also interesting at the same time. And yeah, so through that, I saw also an opportunity to kind of disrupt the market a little bit, because I thought that a lot of the best practices that we see in bids and proposal are actually obsolete in an AI-enabled world, right? So these are, a long story short, this is kind of how I came to do this, and I really enjoy it. It's really, for me, it's translating, technology into business value. So that's kind of like how it all started.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
So we'll get into the meat and kind of get into really gory detail. I can only presume in a moment, but let me just kind of augment what you're saying. So your background is tremendously interesting. I'm almost coming from the dark side, where my background is kind of building products for various companies. VisibleThread's journey. I started this company about 15 years ago, which feels an awfully long time in one sense and awfully short in another sense. But we came out of the idea of actually looking at complex documents. And of course, there's no more complex document than a government contract and sets of complex documents. And really, our mission was to shine a light into kind of requirements that might otherwise be missed in a manual review process. So use automation for that purpose. We first started using AI, actually, a different type of AI, not generative AI, but a thing called NLP, natural language processing, back in 2013, believe it or not, which is 11 years ago. And from a tech standpoint, I guess I like to think that we're pragmatic about technology. Personally, I think it's all about people, process, tooling. It's not about tooling and then lowercase p for people and process. That is a bad thing or a bad perspective on this.
Yeah, I was going to say,
sorry, Chris, go for it.
Yeah, I love that, Fergal. Like, one of the things that you and I started chatting about 6 months ago, and then completely was interesting for me, is your longevity. You've been around for about 20 years or so. So you've seen this kind of, you refer often to the hype cycle. So sometimes to look at the future, you kind of need to look at the past and understand what happened. So maybe you can give it a bit of perspective, like the newbies like myself, in the tech space.
Yeah.
Like, how did it evolve in the past, and how do you see the market going? I think this will set us up for GenAI, I think.
Yeah, it's a great point, Chris, and apologies in advance for being a dinosaur. But I started my career. I finished computer science in 1989. Believe it or not, that's 35 years ago, I think. So it's quite some time. So I've lived through several hype cycles, like really lived through them. I was part of the kind of IT side of that. The very first hype cycle I remember is the internet browser itself. This is when Mark Andreessen created the first browser in 1993. There was a mini hype cycle about 3 years later, which was Java, the language. Everybody thought this was going to be great. It was mini, though. It wasn't as pervasive as the normal hype cycle. Then we came to the dot-com boom and bust, 1999, which I lived through. Again, I was a casualty of kind of, being in a company that was right there, smack bang in the center of that. I started my first product company actually off the back of that in 2001. What was the next hype cycle? It was basically, well, there was a client server moved to the web. That was part of the browser hype cycle. There was the mobile hype cycle. So sorry, I'm boring you with all this detail. So hype cycles have common patterns. And I think Gartner are probably the arch exponents of hype cycles. They characterize it as there's kind of a roller coaster type ride. You go to the top of the hype cycle. That's called the peak of inflated expectations. Then it kind of come off the top when people start to question it and start to realize maybe the returns aren't quite as good as we anticipated. We're off the top of the GenAI hype cycle. This area feels awfully familiar to me. I know you and I have been exchanging some, kind of LinkedIn messages, Chris. Now you're starting to see the little articles come out about, you know what, I'm not getting the value I thought I'd get from GenAI. Classic stuff from multiple locations. Many talking heads are talking about that. Of course, the reality is that the next 1 to 3 to 4 years is going to be people figuring out where the true value actually lies and where the investment really should be made. And I think that's why what you're doing is tremendously interesting for me as a vendor. And it kind of complements what we do because we like to think we're no nonsense. Look, if our stuff isn't good for you, we'll say it. And actually, sometimes it's not the right solution for what a pain is. So in any case, long story short, hype cycles, we're in one, we're off the peak, we're into the kind of trough of disillusionment. That's what Gartner refers to this current phase as. And we're at the start of that. NVIDIA's results were amazing last night, yet it's down 6-7%. We're off the peak, which is great.
That's awesome.
Nothing but positive.
Yeah, I think for our audience, Fergal, I personally like to get tactical and understand this is all. Sure. This is all great, but you're in tech. This is something you've been passionate about for a long time. Can you give us like a practical example? Like where did this work so well? What are the implications? Can you share something concrete with our audience to see exactly what we're talking about when GenAI versus other type of technologies, which I understand to a very high level, but sure. You're the expert, so maybe you can help us understand this in a practical way.
And treat experts and the word expert with great care. Their true expertise is not something that is a given every time. But look, let's go forward with a little bit of good humor. It's probably a good segue into this idea of good and bad use cases, and that's the title of this webinar. And I think, I didn't want to come in here doing a product pitch, so I'm not going to demo you, VisibleThread and all its wonderful glory and what it does well and what it does well in GenAI versus standard technology. I have my current favorite example of good and bad usage of GenAI is actually in Microsoft Word. And if you'll indulge me, I might just share my screen in a moment, but let me kind of back up and explain just certain basic stuff around technology, because the problem with this GenAI stuff is that the vast majority of standard business people who are not technologists really are kind of not entirely sure what it actually does or how it actually works. So if I can use words for this, it might be helpful for the audience. The way generative AI works is that it is a quote unquote predictive technology. It basically predicts the next word in a sequence of words. So my favorite example is, the dog chased what is the next word? It might be the dog chased the car. It might be the dog chased the cat. It could be the dog chased the bee. It could be anything. And what determines that next word is the large language model. That's the engine of generative AI, which is underpinning this whole technology. So if, for instance, you crank up Copilot or you go to ChatGPT, when you're getting this stream of words, which appear incredibly insightful and the detail is incredible and the facts appear to be compelling, all that thing is doing, honestly, is predicting the next word in a sequence of words. And if it has that remit, it can, of course, be prone to hallucinations, which may present content that appears compelling, but is utterly unfactual. And I think this is one of the key tactical lessons for anyone using GenAI. You have got to trust but verify it. You've got to always be on the lookout. And you can't assume, and we human psychology is interesting. We tend to believe authority figures. We tend to believe computers when they give us some result. That's just our default kind of disposition. And the problem with GenAI, and it's a human interaction, almost a product design problem as much as anything else is that in a chatbot, you will believe what it comes back with because you're assuming it knows what it's doing. I mean, it's technology after all, so surely it would get the thing right. But that's just simply not how GenAI works. So to make this extremely real, I'm going to share my screen again, if I can attempt to do this. And I will attempt to
and while
share.
You're doing this, maybe I can talk also, like, that also it has, like, GenAI has also really good use cases. I don't want this to come out from, GenAI doesn't work and
100%.
So I'll let you continue to Fergal. We'll talk about the good use cases after, but I'll let you carry on.
Yeah, and before, like, I guess what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to help educate people as to the good and the bad use cases. And apologies for starting out with the bad stuff, but I think the bad stuff is interesting because I hope it sticks. And then you can kind of, we'll do good stuff as well. Don't worry about that. It's all good. So this is Microsoft Word. I'm sharing Word. This is the NASA SOUP IDIQ, very large, well, relatively large document, 150 pages, very large contract vehicle, 60 billion plus. And there's a lot of people involved in kind of chasing this thing. And what you're typically doing in the world of kind of, proposals and contract reviews, you're typically using Control F or Find. And in many cases, you're looking for certain things. In this example, I'm looking for the word cybersecurity. Now, I'm not here to kind of go through the day in the life of a contracts manager or a proposal manager, but what I'm just trying to suggest is this is a fairly typical ask. Find me stuff around certain concepts. In this case, cybersecurity. There are 27 results. You can see it on the left here, right? And when I click on these things, it brings me exactly to that point in the document. So we humans have a natural expectation that when I search for something or I use a technology like this, it will give me an accurate, 100% accurate result. And if I do the same action tomorrow, it'll give me the same 27 results. It's a perfectly reasonable expectation. That is not how generative AI works. So here is Microsoft Copilot. It's a plugin to Word. And I'm going to ask it the same question, which is basically how many see if I can spell are in this doc. Okay, I think I've got that. Okay, so it's working now. It's basically going to its model. It's looking at the doc. Technically, it's kind of split this doc into all its various bits and pieces. And now it's come back with an answer. And the answer says the term cybersecurity appears twice in your document, which I hope you realize is completely inaccurate and not correct. The actual number is 27. So that's an LLM doing a job that it's not suitable to do. And that's what I wanted to share, Chris, just to kind of give a sense and give everybody a sense of the grounding of, a bad use case to apply generative AI. The good use cases are absolutely there, and they're primarily in the kind of the create editing cycle.
Yeah.
And maybe we can talk about that as well. But do you have any thoughts on what I just shared? Any kind of comments?
Well, I mean, it's. I think you're hitting the nail on the head. It's just the way understanding how the technology works fundamentally, being predictive versus deterministic, and it's not very cool or sexy kind of terms to use, but this is, I think it's incumbent on us, on the community as well, to understand the nuance between the two and the difference between the two, right? And for me, like, if I can add in terms of the good cases, and I would put them in the kind of three buckets, and then we will get into more granular stuff also, Fergal. But I see three things that at the very highest level for GenAI. One is the knowledge discovery, and why is this very powerful for business proposal? Is that oftentimes we want to craft solutions to complex client problems, and we've done this a few times in the past, sometimes hundreds of times, right? So prompting the generative AI to say, hey, give me what's out there, and it's going to give you some ideas or some past performance, or it's going to create something. That's, I think, is very useful. Having worked in proposal, I think it's very useful. It's very compelling. Yeah. Sometimes you want to look at CVs or resumes, past performance, that kind of stuff. So I think that bucket is kind of very nicely suited for GenAI. The second one is content generation. So as we saw, you can put a prompt, it's going to create you something. Now, to your point, you can't rely 100% on what comes out. But I would argue, starting from that as opposed to a blank piece of paper, it's much more efficient, right? So as a proposal manager, now I have an outline, I have something to start with. That's very, very powerful, right? And the third one is kind of content enhancement, right? So we talk about that often, is what the content comes out, you need to refine it, you need to improve it, you need to make it compelling, right? And so, you do that, and, typically in the style guides and proposals, I don't want to get too technical, but essentially you break up long paragraphs, you make it present tense, you talk about the customer, things like that, these are the things that you can use GenAI in some ways to kind of iterate and enhance, right? So those are, for me, the three things that come to mind when you start thinking about GenAI, right?
I think broadly speaking, what's interesting, and I'm just going to clarify for the audience benefit, you use the word deterministic, and I know I'm fluent in that word and you're fluent in that word, but just to kind of make it very clear, a deterministic task is something that you will get one answer. So what we were doing a moment ago with looking for cybersecurity, there are 27 answers. There will always be 27 answers for that search in that document, regardless. So that is deterministic. There's one and only one answer. And no matter how many times you ask the same question, you get the same answer. That's not how generative AI works. It basically predicts, and there's variables around why it changes. If I ask the same question today and I ask the same question tomorrow, I might get a different answer. But coming back to your three pillars, couldn't agree more. The find use case, which is that first category that you talked about, find me similar past performance. Find me where we've talked about cybersecurity before in my corpus of documents. That type of a find is kind of an approximate find. In technical terms, it's semantic search. Yep. And there's elements of GenAI at play here. And there's also actually interesting elements of not GenAI stuff. Semantic search is a technology that's been around for quite some time. So when you combine GenAI, it makes it even better. So you're 100% spot on that. I think that getting off the blank page, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Fergal, I don't want to interrupt.
Yeah, the second class, which is what you talked about, the kind of get me off the blank page, get me a first draft, and actually combining, and again, sorry to blind everybody with science, but there is a lot of tech here, and unfortunately that's just the nature of GenAI. In order to have a large language model, the engine of GenAI, be informed by your proprietary content, you use a technique called RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation. You almost can picture it as, there's my engine, the LLM, and there's my proprietary repository, SharePoint or past performance folders or libraries. So you kind of combine both and you spit out a result. And that result has an ability to refer back to the source where that generated content came from. And that's a really important, that attribution is so important, because then you can be much more confident. It's a little like there's a good search engine out there called Perplexity, and Perplexity allows you to kind of, it's threatening Google slightly, although I'm not sure if that'll work out well in the end for it, but it's a search engine that basically you ask natural language questions, it'll give you the spiel and it'll cite where it got the results from. So in terms of this, that second idea of getting off the blank page is technology-wise using an LLM plus RAG to generate you a first kind of reasonable pass. You must trust but verify at all stages. Anything that comes back from any GenAI, you must always trust it but verify it. So be careful on that. And the third and final kind of evolution of, taking content, simplifying it. It's exactly what we do in our VT Writer product. We score content. We say, okay, here's the grade level. It's too high a grade level for that paragraph. Let's simplify it. Let's just put a button next to that paragraph and say, just simplify it. Give me 3 different ways to rephrase this. And that really kind of gets you moving on much faster. So it's all kind of tactical in nature, but it makes the collective outcome much more fluent, much more efficient.
Yeah. So, Fergal, one of the questions I like to ask tech vendors when I do, audits and demos is, what's the underlying technology that you have, right? And so I get the feeling, and you get mixed answers, right? That's not the point. The point is, I get the feeling that to get kind of like the full power for bids and proposal, a tech vendor needs to incorporate, multiple different AI technologies into their solution to get like the different use case, or maybe just concentrate on one use case and do it very well. What are your thoughts on this kind of paradigm or kind of duality?
I think the boil the ocean approach is rarely a winning approach. In other words, try to take slices of the business problem, try to solve those slices and do them well, and then incrementally get to a much better state in a year, 2, 3 years, or whatever it is. In terms of the tech stack, all generative AI relies on a large language model, this LLM thing. And if anyone on this call hasn't heard of LLM, trust me, you'll have heard on. In a year's time, everybody will need to be fluent on this. It's a bit like the kind of the COVID vernacular. All of a sudden, we were talking COVID, this, that, and the other, and various vaccine types, mRNA. I'm not going to make a comment as to where your stand on COVID is. That's not my point. But suddenly, in the space of a couple of months, we were all so fluent in COVIDese, this language of COVID. It's the same for GenAI. We need to get to be fluent. I'm not sure if everybody is fluent yet on the language, but the LLM is there. This retrieval augmented generation is there. So there's roughly the same set of components for any vendor. For me, the differentiation is the vendor's approach to usability and interaction for users who are not tech. So we have an obligation as vendors not to blind you with science, not to confuse the heck out of you by throwing up screen after screen after screen and, you know, different chat interfaces, and just really thinking thoughtfully about the problem you're trying to solve. If I'm trying to, for instance, make your job of simplifying content easier, then if I could just score every paragraph and just give you a simple button, which is click simplify, and you'll get different options in a much more focused and directed way, that to me is a good design. And that to me is different from, okay, type in your prompt and just say, you know, simplify this content, which kind of leaves it to the person's skills in prompting, which isn't necessarily a given. So you kind of have to design products. We as vendors need to really focus strongly on design. I'm firmly of the view that the best products will be the ones who are best designed, not necessarily with the best underlying technology stack. From a competency standpoint, it's the best design will do it. Why is Apple used by everybody? The design is really well put together.
Yeah, so you're a big UX UI kind of guy, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a curse. It's like people who are great writers or good writers. I'm not suggesting I'm a great UI UX guy. I'm probably an average person on that front, but we do have much better people in our company who are really good at this stuff. But if we have a sensibility, it's really important. I think I'm fortunate I'm a CEO, but I'm also a technical founder. And my interest personally has always been on that bridge between computer systems, this going right back to the 80s, and how we as people, normal people, understand them. How do we get value from them? I can't pretend I do a best job or a great job on this all the time, but it's something that we're constantly striving for. We spend a huge amount of time on that whole area.
Perfect. Fergal, do you have other use cases to share with us? Like kind of just you shared the one use case. Do you have other use cases to share? Maybe you had a table to share, maybe, or something to look into.
Yeah. So there's kind of a way that I would suggest, and this is something that is, you know, a useful approach that we're finding really, really helpful. And I'm going to explain this, and hopefully it will be of some use for people on the webinar. What this is kind of what we're dubbing as a use case tech matrix. And when we say use case, all we're really talking about is that bit of your cycle that you are trying to automate. So on the left-hand side, we've got some goals. So the very first goal, develop a requirements compliance matrix from a government-issued RFP. Great. This is a way to test what technology would make sense in that context. So in that case, given the fact that a requirements compliance matrix, you know, shredding a doc, for instance, you know, the NASA soup doc, if I want to shred the full of that, the 150 pages, and get it into each paragraph split out accurately, and we don't miss any requirement, then that must be 100% accurate. And going back to the previous part of this discussion, using generative AI to do that type of job would not be appropriate. And the reason is that you need your 100% accuracy so that you don't miss any requirements, so the reports are the same every time you run this stuff. So what we're doing in this matrix is we're saying, okay, what's the characteristic of the task? What level of expectation do you have? If it needs to be 100% accurate, that helps you then understand, well, actually, you know what? Probably GenAI is not suitable for that particular task. So we're using this a lot. It's very, very helpful in terms of our customers and how our customers are beginning to understand the landscape of tech. We're trying to avoid, you know, another example of this, you know, generate first draft proposal sections. That's GenAI all day long. I mean, that is a superb use case. And that's goal number 5 here. Goal number 6, analyze FAR clauses and data rights and various other things. You kind of, that could be a mix, and it could be using a combination of technologies. So you kind of have to look at it from the point of view of what is the right tech for the job at hand. But my suggestion is to try and think about what you're trying to automate. naturally what we're finding, and I was on a webinar last week, a CEO webinar that the APMP were doing, and some of the comments coming across on that were, look, we don't have time to do all this detailed analysis. It's just cripey. I mean, we're working 60, 70-hour weeks. How can we as proposal managers or contracts people actually possibly do this? And I think that's a genuine challenge. But if you're going to invest in software, avoid buying software unless you've at least done some of this work. And I think, Chris, from your standpoint, I think that's your sweet spot. That's where you're operating most. And I think that's where the opportunity seems very strong, to me at any rate, that you can help people kind of, almost be that independent consultant, looking at the needs, the business requirements, and mapping them to the appropriate software side. So I think it might be useful to kind of maybe just share your approach on that.
I mean, just before I talk about that, I think, to your point, Fergal, I feel like the abundance of choice creates this paradox, right? Like where you make people more anxious and more unhappy by giving them more choices than less, right? So
people don't like choice. People do not like choices.
So learning to choose is difficult. Learning to choose well is even harder. And learning to choose well in a limitless possibilities is harder still, right? So for me, I thought to myself, I attended New Orleans APMP earlier this year, and I was a bit disappointed, right? Because I was hoping to learn about new technologies and get to the crux of the, things that you and I are discussing now and other sessions is like, what's underneath that? Like how does this work? What about your data? How do you manage data? Because all of this is predicated on, the good data hygiene, which I don't necessarily want to get into today, but there's some of those discussions were important, but were not happening. So I think there's quite a bit of education, I think, to be done, and this is my intent, and I think yours as well, where we have a common goal, right? But so with that being said, I figured that there's I'm a more of a framework kind of guy, simplify things so I can my simple brain can understand it, and I created the things you alluded earlier, Fergal, which is a AI value proposition canvas. And maybe I can share, and you can challenge me on some of this stuff, or ask me questions.
Sure.
We don't have. I can talk about this for all day, but I just kind of talk about.
I'll just put in a quick. Sorry for over cross-cutting on this one, Chris, but I will say to the audience, because we're doing this for you, and I hope it's helpful. If there's any bit of this that you feel you'd like to see a follow-on webinar about or more detail on, we're very happy to kind of do deep dives on this. And I think to Chris's point, APMP NOLA, which is the New Orleans APMP, it's kind of oriented towards the business of proposals. It's not necessarily a kind of a super deep dive into the tech stack behind products. So it's kind of hard to be all things to all people. But if there's demand and we see sufficient demand, I'm sure Chris and I are happy to kind of get back and go deep on some of this stuff. Back to you, Chris.
Absolutely, yeah. And so the first thing I see is, and which was astounding, is like, folks start to, with the shiny object, tell me about the tool. What tool do you have, right? So I think it's the wrong question to ask. It's like me wanting to lose weight, and the first thing is I go sign up to a gym, like I don't think necessarily, or buy like a pair of running shoes, right? So I don't think that's the best approach. Right? As a matter of fact, I think tools is probably towards the end of the decision matrix. But anyway, so just to discuss this more concretely, so I broke down this into 9 decision points things or buckets we have to think about, right? So the first one is around building the business case, right? So, and this is not necessarily, this is for different audience, right? So if you're an executive or a leader of a company, right, or a CFO, and you need to decide, do I invest in this technology or not? You need to do kind of, in some way, shape or form, a return on investment, right? Like you don't care about the technology, the training, or anything else. So this is kind of the business case side. And I think the first point that I want to make is about deciding what's your AI ambition and what's the problem you're trying to solve, right? So what do I mean by that? So your AI ambition for me at a very, very high level, even with tools, is, are you going for operational efficiency or are you trying to be strategic? And what I mean by strategic is, do you want to reduce risk? Do you want to increase your win rate? Do you want to have a good customer alignment? Those are strategic questions that tools and AI can help you, right? And in terms of operational efficiency, we talk about process automation or workflow optimization or cost efficiency, right? So you put all this together, you're like, okay, this is what I want to do. Define your problem first, and then you can decide if there's a good return on investment. Are you saving time? Are you going after more bids? So on and so forth, right? So this is the first kind of general bucket. And I can go into deep details, and people can reach out to me on LinkedIn and connect if they want to talk about this. I love talking about AI tools and AI in general. So that's the first part. The second part is, I think we ought to be honest with ourselves and make an assessment about our readiness to embrace this technology, right? And there's a lot of friction and what I call barriers to adoption. Like people, myself, naturally, I don't like change. I like to do the same thing over and over again, and I'm just comfortable with it, right? So you need to look at feasibility, right? Do we have the resources? Do we have the budget? Are we technically ready for this, right? And the other one is, what's our AI literacy? What's our culture? What's the data and content? How do we manage that, right? So, and where are we in our maturity curve, right? It's like not all companies have the same level of maturity for bids and proposals. So we got to ask ourselves those deep questions before. Again, I haven't talked about tools yet. This is all the things that we have to tee up, right? And then what's your deployment strategy? I would, argue that pilot projects, short time to value is probably the right way to start, but people might have different opinion about this. And what's your change management strategy? Because fundamentally, this is not a technology problem. It's not. This is a change management problem that needs to be resolved. And so the last part,
Chris, can I just stop you on that one?
Please, Fergal.
Irrespective of whether you're talking about generative AI or any type of automation, I think that last point about change management is commonly missed.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how often you'll see shelfware. In other words, software that's bought, it doesn't get used. It's a waste of investment. It's a waste of everybody's time. You go through a cycle. Fortunately, in our case, we are clinical about avoiding that because it's not in our interest as a vendor to sell you software and then you churn on year one. It doesn't make any sense. So we want to weed that out, and our customer success team is doing a phenomenal job of doing that. So if you're not ready to buy our products, we don't want you as a customer. It makes no sense.
That's right.
You have to be ready, and readiness is all about, it's a people process question. Are you even ready for this stuff? You really have to be honest about that question. And it may be that the timing doesn't make sense. It may be that you're going to be the next year just banging it out manually and doing whatever you do, but it will be arguably inefficient, but it may be the wrong time to adopt technology. And I think we have to be honest about that. Back to you, Chris.
Absolutely. And you correct me if I'm wrong, Fergal, but I read somewhere, and based on experience, 80% of digital transformation fail. That's a big staggering number. And I think the reasons for that, again, to your point, is about people and processes and not technology itself necessarily, right? So just to round out this conversation, then on the tactical deployment, we need to think about also people, how are we going to train and upskill folks, right? Like what's the knowledge gap? What is required? Are we going to do, prompt engineering? Are we going to learn more about the tool itself? Like how's it going to work in an operational environment, right? And one concept I find very powerful is this, what's our current as is state from a process and workflow perspective, and what's the desire to be state, and then what's the bridge, right? So I think this is one way to think about where we are, where we want to be, right? And then you get into the tool selection, right? Tools now, is almost one of the last things. What kind of tool you want? Do you want a generic tool? You want a specialized tool? You want a niche, you want something GenAI, you want predictive, you want NLP. In this, we get into these discussions where we're talking about what use cases.
The problem is, Chris, people don't know what they want in many cases, and you can't blame them because they don't really know. It's kind of like which comes first, the chicken or the egg. Can you go off and kind of do all these goals and say, we're going to automate these steps? In reality, in the messy real world, it's a bit of both. Sometimes maybe a vendor comes along and says, I can do this, and then you map it back to some business challenge, or the other way around. But either way, however you arrive at the end result, in my opinion, it needs to be done with a certain level of kind of consideration. And you need to think about things like, will this scale for us? Will it actually be workable in multiple environments, different isolated, SCIFs? Will it work in SCIFs? Will it pass security? All this kind of stuff. So there's a whole bunch of kind of detailed questions that we often get into.
Well, I like to take, thanks, Fergal. I like to take small chunks when it comes to deployment, right? So before I deploy a big tool or I make $100,000 investment or whatever the case might be, and then, what are we trying to prove? Let's have a, proof of value on a very small scale, make sure this works, and then get to the next step, right? Very incremental in nature. And the real cost, in my opinion, is not the tool, because the tool is the real cost, but there's a lot of hidden costs and change management, right? So that doesn't show on the profit and loss because people are already paid regardless, but human, we are all overworked. We have 80 hours jobs and stuff like that, right? So there's an implicit and an explicit cost. I don't think the cost of the tool or the subscription is the big driver, in my opinion, because there's other hidden costs and there's a lot more value to unlock, right? Probably much higher. Anyway, I don't want to belabor this point. If people want to, I have this resource on our website. I'm going to create a guide to also help out. If people have any questions, happy to answer. But that's kind of a framework that I'm building and I'm using with clients to help them sort out, the problems that you mentioned earlier, the time and knowledge and all that. So.
Yeah. And I think just to kind of do a shameless plug for Chris, the reason he's on this webinar that we wanted him on here is he's one of the few people we've come across, at least I've come across, who has a very considered tool agnostic approach to the evaluation process. And I'm convinced that that's a really important service for many companies, be it small to medium businesses or large business enterprises. Anybody who's seriously considering using automation to good effect, I do think this area of kind of specialization, independent advice, guidance, consultancy, it's hugely valuable. So I definitely would suggest anybody who's interested in this stuff, certainly go look at the Hovister website. There's a ton of good data out there, and Chris will certainly help you kind of in any efforts you're doing.
Thanks, Fergal. This is not a paid advertisement. It's a free advertisement.
I don't get kickbacks on this, but I'm getting kind of tired. We want to be. I'm not paying lip service to this idea. We as a vendor want to be a partner for our customers. Our customer success team, it's drilled into them to look at it from a partner standpoint. It's drilled into our sales team that we don't want to sell at all costs. We want to actually sell product that genuinely adds value. But I think many people, because there's a proliferation of kind of GenAI first vendors that are out in the last, particularly the last 2 years, who are great at certain parts, i.e. the GenAI parts, but they're not doing the deterministic bit, because trust me, it takes like a lot of engineering and kind of product work to do the deterministic bits, those bits where you need accurate answers, the things like your shreds, your accurate acronym pulls, your compares, all this kind of stuff. It does take effort. And I just think it's a very noisy space we're in from a product standpoint. I think it's great because it's freeing up budget. So that's good for us and it's good for any vendors. But equally, the downside for you who are listening to this conversation is that the choice issue that Chris alluded to. Yep. People, defaults, it's kind of behavior bias or kind of default bias. Whenever you open a product or open anything, you tend to always accept the defaults. 9 out of 10 people accept the defaults. And that's an aversion to too much choice. You either don't want to spend the time and energy to kind of examine all this stuff. And we know this from a product standpoint. When we design products, we always really consider long and hard. What are our default views? What are the default flows? Do they make sense? We spent a huge amount of time and energy rewriting a lot of our VT Docs product, which we released this year, version 6. And a ton of it was actually user interface and user interface redesign, because we realized that some of our defaults were a little bit off. So that's a specific example, but fundamentally, when you're reviewing all these tools, you're going to get inundated, and you can easily kind of throw your hands in the air and say, I have no time for this, or it's just overwhelming. Yep. And I think we need to get through that, because people need automation. This business, it's so pressurized. The government doesn't, if it says your drop dead date is March 15th, that's it. Of course, when they suit themselves, they'll push it out. But we as contractors need to, we don't have any flex. And that's why you get this kind of real pressure cooker on our thing.
Just to add a little bit on that, my perspective is very tools agnostic. I don't care what tools my clients use, as long as they use the right one and helping them figure out, because I don't think there's one tool that solves all the problems. And this is the real thing. Like every tool or category of tools will solve a certain problem. So let's define that and go after it. There's no, there's no silver or magic bullet for that. Fergal, we can talk more. We can open it up. We have 15 minutes. Up to you. We still have some stuff to talk about, but it's up to you if you want to open up or keep. Yeah,
let me just check in with Michal. Michal, are you kind of out and about? So Michal opened up the session. Anything coming across on the chat or any questions?
I'm listening along. We have a couple of questions coming in, but we do have loads of time. One of the main questions that popped up when you were speaking was around that 80% of digital transformation that fails. Are you ready? Are we ready to take on AI? Are we ready to take on those points? Is there any key elements that organizations should be like how to judge themselves. Are they ready? Are they actually genuinely ready? Is there any kind of things that you would look for when you're doing that evaluation?
I have a view on this, and I'm sure Chris has.
So, I'll add to your point. Yeah.
So my view is based on culture and people. If the culture in your organization, irrespective, you may be messy as heck, you may be not necessarily doing everything very efficiently. There may be some areas where there's obvious improvements to be done. But if the culture is open, and by open I mean it can deal with change, that's a really positive indicator. It's a leading indicator of future success. The second thing is, I would always counsel, and I would echo what Chris is saying, if you can start at least with some kind of proof of value idea, some kind of slice of something, do a 6 months or a year maybe, which in large organizations is a short time frame. Look at a certain part of your process and look to optimize that certain part of your process, and make sure that you've got a tight team where you're measuring the actual payback. So you've got I typically counsel people, find somebody who's, I don't mean to be ageist on this, but somebody who's young, smart, not necessarily in a senior leadership position, but will be in the future. And you can kind of spot these people a mile off. That's the person you want in the evaluation stage. And the vendor needs to absolutely 1,000,000% commit to their customer success function. If the vendor is a kind of fill in your Calendly link and you have to do all the work to get the airing with the customer, a bit like kind of low cost airlines. You don't want that kind of vendor. You want a vendor who won't be cheap, because this stuff costs, people costs, we have to pay our bills as well. But you want a vendor who's going to actually walk with you, and who isn't just, the customer success people isn't just saying, press that button to do this. It's, what is your business process? So a lightweight version of what Chris is advocating for here. Chris's perspective here is much larger, and it's also about the kind of, how do you find the right technology stack as well as the right thing to automate, and are you ready? But in my experience, if you got somewhat sharp people, I'm caveat, or sharp people, one or two, who can kind of take the charge in this, who have the time, who you keep the scope relatively tight, you show the value, you can show leadership after 1, 2, 3 months, the actual metrics, here it was before, it took us, 6 hours to shred a document and get a spreadsheet. Now it's taking us 10 minutes. Savings. What is the saving? Quantify it so that you now have data rather than opinions. There will be a second strand of this, which is, so the quantitative data is really important. The qualitative feedback loop is really important. In other words, I enjoyed using this. I found it a good thing to use, because that emotional tie, I can't understate that or overstate it, should I say. That's really important as well. So it's kind of those two factors: quantitative metrics, qualitative metrics, feedback loops, surveys, and then you come back. And our best implementations have always had those characteristics, where there's good people, there's an openness to actually adopt technology, and you're measuring with quantitative and qualitative metrics.
Yeah, I'll just add just a bit of color, 10 seconds on that. So find a champion. Usually there's somebody who's eager, or a group of people that are eager to make change. And I would ask yourself, how is your team or management, when you ask them for training budget or upskilling, because this is going to require a lot. How was it your experience in the past? If they're always shying away from that, then maybe this is not the right thing for you to do, because it is going to take budget and training and upskilling. And how are you done, previous project? Do you have a change management agent, or because people cannot take this on as an added task, go and help me transform. So either dedicate a resource that's going to do this, full time, or get external help, but this is going to be important for you to be successful.
Very good.
I would say on that one, the champion thing, it's interesting, because I know, Chris, you're probably dealing with more enterprise type clients. SMBs, and there might be some on this webinar, wouldn't have the luxury of a full-time resource on this.
Yep.
So my sense is it's really the characteristics of the person. Is there somebody who's ambitious, who wants to actually progress in their career, who sees the benefit of automation, who then can carry that load, as well as, let's be realistic, carry their normal load? And that's the reality of some of the SMB world. Enterprise has the same characteristics, because even though they're multi-billion-dollar companies, there's kind of an expectation, particularly in proposal teams, that they're still cranking proposals. So it's really hard to kind of get that freed up. Again, that's where, somebody like you comes in and actually starts to, that's where the C-suite, if they're bought into the change management aspect, will free people up. They will support it if they see the actual strategic benefit. And that's an open question. We're working with several customers where that C-suite leadership sponsorship is absolutely in play, and it makes a massive difference. It's huge.
Very good. So champions, training, budget, change management process, all good things to think about when.
And notice how none of that, Michal, was tech. None of it is tech. It's all people process.
Absolutely. And this is actually an interesting question that kind of ties, but it's more to the application of GenAI rather than maybe the purchasing of a product. It comes from Douglas. It's a great question. If the objective of GenAI is to remove manual response tasks, but due to hallucinations, we need to trust but verify, how do we avoid just swapping one manual task for another one?
Yeah.
That's a good point.
So let me take that on if I might. No, it's fantastic. And it's dead right. It's a question of judgment. So if I, for instance, let's take a very simple case. Let's say I'm creating a draft management plan, and I'm using generative AI to create the draft management plan. But it does make some mistakes on the draft management plan, but at the same time, it creates 2 pages of written content that's reasonably good, which is a classic case for using GenAI effectively. If there are some kind of, errors in what it generates, let's say, halfway down the first page, it kind of makes a factual error, which it may well do. The time it would take you to create that first draft, for the sake of argument, let's say is an hour and a half. The time for me to review it for factual accuracy is about 5 minutes. So it's not a question of kind of you're swapping one. So yes, it is not a binary question. And I think Douglas's assertion that you're swapping one manual task for another manual task, yes, but you're swapping one very long manual task for a very short manual task. And I think that's a better way to view it. So it's down to where you apply generative AI. My favorite prompt, honestly, because my grammar isn't that great, is the one where I'm using Visio, which is embedded into VT Writer, our product. And I'm asking it to, I'm in Word, I've got an add-in in Word, I select my paragraph, and I say, okay, now Visi, tie it up for correctness of grammar, make sure that tenses are aligning, make sure I've kind of designed a prompt. Actually, I stole the prompt from the internet, which is great. There's tons of great prompts out there. And I just put them into Visi as a default standard prompt that then everybody can get the benefit of. That is a game changer for me, because it's doing 2 things. One, it's actually making much better outcomes, but I've got a very focused perspective. I found a paragraph, it looks a little odd to me. I can't quite figure out why. I need to tighten it up or get in different versions of it. So that's the editing cycle. Again, creation, editing, refinement, they're hugely, hugely powerful applications of GenAI. And of course, going back to Chris's earlier comment, the general find me all the stuff in my repository where I talked about, this type of past performance, these technology areas, where do we have certain types of indemnifications? Have we ever done this stuff before? This kind of idea of, your teaming decision, your bid no bid decision, and finding content that might help that argument is classic, great application for GenAI.
Absolutely. I have nothing to add on to this. This is a very complete answer.
Sorry. Told you I talk. Anyway, all good. So I'm not sure. Is there any other questions, Michal, in the chat? I don't know if there is.
There is one in relation to, I suppose it's quite similar. With the rapid growth of AI products and GenAI products, what advice would you give organizations that are struggling to keep up with all the noise, all the product evaluations, all the changes, all the updates?
It's hard. And it's somebody in my position, it's my job to do that. So of course, that's what I'm doing quite a bit. And that's what our people are doing, as you know, Michal. And Chris, you're doing it for your own perspective. I would say, staying in tune with APMP, if you're a proposal manager, is a useful thing. If you're a contracts manager, probably NCMA, National Contract Management Association, is a good area. And there are communities of users there. We're trying to be as helpful as possible ourselves as VisibleThread, so please tune into any of our webinars. We try to be, as much as we can, kind of agnostic of our own stuff. Our own stuff stands on its own merit, and we feel it's very strong, but we're not trying to push product at all stages. So, but we would say that, wouldn't we? So you have to be careful about us as well. You have to trust but verify what we're saying and make sure it has validity. I think people like Chris, I genuinely feel that there's going to be a kind of a niche class of consultants who actually are able to help large customers especially navigate technology, because there's so much going on. I mean, you and I were chatting about this the other day, Chris. There's literally in the last year to 2 years, there's maybe 15 to 20 new vendors out there. I mean, in the early days of APMP, I think there was maybe 10 or 12 vendors. We used to hang out, and this is the early 2010s.
Yeah.
Now, literally, it's doubled or if not tripled in terms of vendors out there.
I would say on average, Fergal, this is my rule of thumb, because I do this like almost full time, is like one vendor pops up every 2 weeks maybe. And so,
it's easy to take an LLM and wrap a bloody website around it and kind of do basic, whiz-bangy stuff. Yeah.
And I spent like, a good chunk of my week, maybe 5 hours or 10 hours, just auditing and looking after new vendors, see what's out there, because you don't know if it's good or not. You can't say, oh, this is new, and you need to do the work, right? So hopefully that time, I'm personally trying to educate and give the knowledge, for folks to help them. But it is a lot of effort. It is work, but you can shortcut a little bit of that time if you find the right resources and people to follow people that have something interesting to say on LinkedIn or otherwise. That's also helpful.
The other thing, look, it's a shameless plug, but I put out a newsletter. I try to be as reasonable as possible, as independent as possible. But that's more from an education standpoint, helping people to understand GenAI, what it's good for, what it's less good for, other areas of technology. I think in terms of kind of evaluating, I will leave you with one final thing. You actually have to trust but verify the vendors as well, because vendors will often say lots of things. I mean, we would have done the same thing in the past, maybe in our early years, where you're trying to get your initial deals. Maybe the software is a little bit flaky. Maybe it doesn't quite scale to the right, can it handle a 5,000 page document? Maybe not. I'm not sure. Can it handle 500 concurrent users at one time? Yeah, maybe not. These are the things that for vendors like us are really hard problems. In the early days of Twitter, for instance, it used to bomb out frequently. And every early product company goes through this cycle. Fortunately, we have been in market a long time. And whilst in some ways that can be a negative, in this context, it's absolutely a positive, because we're deployed into 11 of the top 15 government contractors. We've got robust technology, and the GenAI stuff that we're building is extremely robust as well. So great news there is also actually GenAI itself and LLMs are moving so fast that we can take advantage of the best technology, because we're LLM agnostic. We don't care what LLM you have. In fact, many of our customers are using their own LLM that we simply plug into, and then we take advantage of that capacity, which is great.
Fabulous. Well, in order to wrap up, I think any final comments, and Chris, even how to connect with you would be great. Thank you so much for your time. And I would express to all the audience to connect with Chris.
Yeah, I mean, the best way is on LinkedIn, Chris Bassila, or on our website, www.hovister.com. I love talking about this. If you have, questions, or you want to bounce ideas, people that know me know that I enjoy talking to people, and I can talk this all day. So please don't be shy. Send me a message and let's have a chat. Happy to help.
Very good, very good. Well, look, I'll wrap up today's session with just a few parting notes. We have a huge amount of content coming in the next couple of weeks. We're really, really excited about some of the things that are coming next week. In fact, we have a demo and a kind of a conversation about AI in our product. So a couple of people in the chat was kind of responding to what Fergal was talking about, and Visi, and using prompts within VT Writer and things like that. If you want to see that live, next week is a great chance to see that and ask some questions and see some demos and see some use cases and example in practice. Following that, we actually have a run of 4 webinars. So there are 4 parts. We're calling it the GovCon Trailblazers campaign. We're tackling in multiple themes, and we have some great external speakers coming to kind of present with us and for several different topics. We're starting with cooperation and getting buy-in in GovCon. We're moving on then to data management, talking about SharePoint. We talked a little bit about the importance today about having quality data. So that that webinar is very vital to that. We're going to talk about efficiencies in the GovCon space, where maybe AI can help, maybe where deterministic software can help. We're going to look at trends in that webinar in particular. We're going to talk about AI again with Fergal and Heather Murray, who's a kind of a tech expert. She's talking about how to explain tech to people who aren't tech-minded, people who are more in practice. I think it's a really good, that will be a really strong webinar. And finally, in October, we're going to be talking about kind of risk management. So that's a real contracts-focused webinar. We have a great panel lined up for that too. So all of these are available on the dashboard below. They're all free, exactly like today's webinar. We'd be delighted if you want to register. If you want to see VisibleThread in person, we have some things coming up. So we are in Anaheim in October. We're sponsoring APMP, the Western chapter. So the day before that event, we're actually going to be in Anaheim. We're doing customer forum. We're going to have customer speakers. We're going to be sharing some use cases and a bit of networking. If you're in the Western side of the US, if you're in the West Coast, check that out. We'd love to have you there. Again, registration is free, and we'd be delighted to have you there. Even if you're not a customer and you just want to talk to the VisibleThread team, you're more than welcome at that event. And we're back in Virginia in November. So we're about to launch our VT Summit. So stay tuned on the website for that announcement, that date, the agenda, everything, all that will be announced. My final few notes, please do connect with us, connect with Chris. Thank you, Chris, for your time. The recording and the slides will be available after the webinar. And the last thing, I would wish there is a survey that pops up when this webinar finishes. It's on the right-hand panel right now. We'd love your feedback. Fergal mentioned about like topics that you'd like to see in the future. We're always trying to we want to create the best value for you. So if you have any topics, if you have any comments, a general rating for this webinar, we'd be delighted to hear it. So thank you so much. So thank you all and have a great day.
Thanks, Michal. Thanks, Fergal.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate you joining us. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Done.